Welcome to Windy Night Stories. Tonight's story is by Walter de la Mare, The Vats. Many years ago now, in that once upon a time which is the memory of the imagination rather than the workaday mind, I went walking with a friend. Of what passed before we set out, I have nothing but the vaguest recollection. All I remember is that it was early morning, that we were happy to be in one another's company, and that there were bright red boughs overhead amongst which the birds floated and sang, and that the early dews still burned in their crystal in the sun. We were taking our way almost at haphazard across country. There was now grass, now the faintly sparkling flinty dust of an English road underfoot. With remarkably few humans to be seen, we trudged on, turning our eyes ever and again to glance laughingly, questioningly, or perplexedly at one another's, then slanting them once more on the blue canopied countryside. It was spring, in the month of May, I think, and we were talking of time. We speculated on what it was, and where it went to, touched in furtive tones on the fourth dimension and exchanged the magic formula. We wondered if pigs could see time as they could see the wind, and wished we could recline a while upon those bewitching banks where it grows wild. We confessed to each other of how late we had been pining in our secret hearts for just a brief spell of an eternity of it. Time wherein we could be and think and dream all that each busy, huggy-mugger, feverish, precipitate 24 hours would not allow us to be or think or dream. Impractical, infatuate desire. We desired to muse, to brood, to meditate, to embark, with a buoyant cargo, upon that quiet stream men call reverie. We had all but forgotten how even to sleep. We lay like Argus of nights, with all our 100 eyes ajar. There were books we should never now be able to read, speculations we should never be able to explore, riddles we should never so much as hear put, much less expounded. There were, above all, waking visions now past hoping for, long since shut away from us by the stream of the hasty moments, as they tick and slit and slide irrecoverably away. In the gay folly of that bright morning, we could almost have vowed there were even other selves waiting for us, with whom no kind of precarious tryst we had ever made we had ever been faithful to. Perhaps they and we would be ready, if only the world's mechanical clocks would cease their trivial moralizings. And memories, surely they would come arrowing home in the first of the evening, to haunts serene and unmolested, if only the weather and mood and season and housing we could offer were decently propitious. We had frittered away, squandered so many days, weeks, years, and had saved so little. Spendthrifts of the unborrowable, we had been living on our capital, a capital bringing in how meager an interest, and we were continually growing poorer. Once, when we were children, and in our own world, an hour had been as capacious as the blue bowl of the sky, and of as refreshing as a milk. Now its successors haggardly snatched their way past our sluggard senses, like thieves pursued. Like an hourglass that cannot tell the difference between its head and its heels, like a dial on a sunless day, like a timepiece wound up and bereft of its pendulum, so were we. Age, we had hideously learned, devours life as a river consumes flakes of falling snow. Soon we should be beggars, with scarcely a month to our name, and none to give us alms. I confess that at this crisis in our talk I caught an uncomfortable glimpse of the visionary stallions of my hearse, ink-black streaming manes and tails, positively galloping me off, wreaths, glass, corpse and all, to keep their dismal appointment with the grave, and even at that, abominably late. Indeed, our minds had at length become so profoundly engaged in these pictures and forebodings as we paced on, that a complete aeon might have meanwhile swept over our heads. We talked ourselves into a kind of oblivion, nor had either of us given the least thought to our direction or destination. We had been following not even so much as our noses, and then suddenly we came to. Maybe it was the unwonted silence, a silence unbroken by the harp-like drone of noonday that recalled us to ourselves. Maybe the air in these unfamiliar parts was of a crisper quality, or the mere effect of the strangeness around us had muttered in secret to our inward spirits. Whether or not, we both of us discovered at the same instant, and as if at a signal, that without being aware of it, and while still our tongues were wagging on together in our old-fashioned theme, we had come into sight of the Vats. We looked up, and lo, they lay there in the middle distance, in a cluster enormous under the cloudless sky. And here were we. Imagine two age-scarred wolf-skinned humans of prehistoric days, paddling along at shut of evening on some barbarous errand, and suddenly from a sweeping crest on Salisbury Plain, descrying on the nearer horizon the awful monoliths of Stonehenge. An experience resembling that was ours this summer day. We came at once to a standstill among the far-flung stretches of the unknown plateau on which we had refound ourselves, and with eyes fixed upon these astonishing objects, stood and stared. I have called them vats. Vats they were not, but rather sunken reservoirs, vast semi-spherical primeval cisterns of an area many times of the bloated and swollen gasometers, which float like huge flattened bubbles between earth and heaven under the sunlit clouds of the Thames. But no sunbeams dispread themselves here. They lay slumbering in a grave crystal light which lapped, deep as the Tuscarora trough, above and around their prodigious stone plates, or slats, or slabs, or laminae, their steep slopes washed by the rarefied atmosphere of their site, in an hue of a hoary green. As we gazed at them like this from afar, they seemed to be in number, as I remember, about 9, but they were by no means all of a size, for one or two of the rotundas were smaller in compass than the others, just as there may be big snails or mushrooms in a family, and little ones. But any object on earth of a majesty or magnitude that recalls the pyramids is a formidable spectacle, and not a word passed between us, scarcely a glance, as with extreme caution and circumspection we approached, creeping human pace by pace, to view them nearer. A fit of shivering came over me, I recollect, as thus advantaged I scanned their enormous sides, shaggy with tufts of a monstrous moss, and scarred with yard-wide circumambulations of lichen. Gigantic grasses stooped their fatted seed pods from the least rough ledge. They might be walls of ice, so cold their aspect, or of a matter discoverable only on an alien planet. Not, though they were horrific to the eye, not that they were in themselves appalling to the soul. Far rather, they seemed to be emblems of an ineffable peace, harmless as, centuries before Noah, were the playing leviathans in a then privy Pacific. And when one looked close on them, it was to see myriads of animated infinitesimals in crevice and cranny, of a beauty, hue, and symmetry past eye to see. Indeed, there was a hint remotely human in the looks of these vats. The likeness between them resembled that between generations of mankind, countless generations old. Contemplating them with the unparalleled equanimity their presence at last bestowed, one might almost have ventured to guess their names. And never have I seen a sward or turf so smooth and virginally emerald, which heaved itself against their steep flanks. My friend and I, naturally enough, were acutely conscious of our minuteness of stature as we stood side by side in this unrecorded solitude and, out of our little round heads, peered up at them with our eyes. And the families of weeds flourishing in their interstices were of an age to daunt the imagination. Their ancestry must have rooted itself here when the dinosaur and the tribes of the megatherium roamed the earth's crust and the pterodactyl clashed through its twilight, thousands of centuries before the green acorn sprouted that was to afford little Cain in a fallen world his first leafy petticoats. I realized as if at a sigh why smiles the Sphinx, why the primary stars have blazed on in undiminishing midnight luster during man's brief history, and his childish constellations have scarcely by a single inch of heaven changed in their apparent stations. They wore that air of lively timelessness which decks the thorn and haunts the half-woken senses with the odor of sweetbriar, yet they were gray with the everlasting, as are the beards of the patriarchs and the cindery craters of the moon. Theirs was the semblance of having been lost, forgotten, abandoned, like some foundered Nereid-haunted derelict of the first sailors, rotting in dream upon an undiscovered shore. They hunched their vast shapes out of the green beneath the sunless blue of space, and for untrodden leagues around them, stretched like a paradisal savanna, what we poor thronging clock-vexed men call silence, solitude. In telling of these vats, it is difficult to convey in mere words even a fraction of their effect upon our minds, and not merely our minds. They called to some hidden being within us that, if not their coeval, was at least aware of their exquisite antiquity. Whether of archangelic or demonic construction, clearly they had remained unvisited by mortal man for as many centuries at least as there are cherries in Damascus or beads in Tierra del Fuego. Sharers of this thought, we two dwarf visitors had whispered an instant or two together, face to face, and then were again mute. Yes, we were of one mind about that. In the utmost depths of our imaginations, it was clear to us that these supremely solitary objects, if not positively cast out of thought, had been abandoned. But by whom? My friend and I had sometimes talked of the divine abandoner, and also, if one can and may distinguish between mood and person, between the dream and the dreamer, of it. Here was the vacancy of his presence, just as one may be aware of a filament of his miracle in the smiling beauty that hovers above the swaying grasses of an indecipherable gravestone. Looking back on the heatless and rayless noonday of those vats, I see, as I have said, the mere bodies of my friend and me, the upright bones of us, indescribably dwarfed by their antediluvian monstrosity. Yet within the lightless bellies of these sarcophagi were heaped up, as we were utterly assured, though how, I know not, floods, beyond measure, of the waters for which our souls had pined. Waters, imaginably so clear as to be dense, as if of melted metal more translucent than even crystal, of such a tenuous purity that not even the moonlit branches of a dream would spell their reflex in them, so costly, so far beyond price, that this whole stony world's rubies and sapphires and amethysts of Mandalay and Guadalajara and Socomisk, all the treasure houses of Cambolic and the booty of King Tamburlaine, would suffice to purchase not one drop. It was indeed the unseen, the imagined, the untold of, the fabulous, the forgotten that lies alone safe on mortal moth and rust, the forgotten that alone lies safe from mortal moth and dust, and these vats, their very silence held us spellbound, as were the isles before the sirens sang. But how, it may be asked? No sound? No spectral tread? No faintest summons? And not the minutest iota of superscription? None. I sank my very being into nothingness, so that I seemed to become but a shell receptive to the least of whispers. But the multitudinous life that was here was utterly silent. No sigh, no ripple, no pining chime of rilling drop within. Waters of life, but infinitely still. I may have used extravagant terms. My friend and I used none. We merely stood in dumb survey of these crusted, butt-like domes of stone, wherein slept elixir vitae, whose last echo had been the choragium of the morning stars. God knows there are potent explosives in these latter days. My friend and I had merely the nails upon our fingers, a penknife, and a broken pair of scissors in our pockets. We might have scraped 77 growths of a Nebuchadnezzar's talons down to the quick, and yet have left all but unmarked and unscarred those mossed and monstrous laminae. But we had tasted the untastable, and were refreshed in spirit at least a little more endurably than are the camel riders of the Sahara, dream-ridden by mirage. We knew now and forever that time pure is, that here, somewhere awaiting us and all forlorn mankind, lay hid the solace of our mortal longing, that doubtless the seraph whose charge is the living waters will in the divine hour fetch down his iron key in his arms and, well, Dives, rich man and crumb waster that he was, pleaded out of the flames but for one drop of them. Neither my friend nor I was a Dives then, nor was ever likely to be, and now only I remain. We were children of Lazarus, aging, footsore, dusty, and athirst. We smiled openly and with an extraordinary gentle felicity at one another, his eyes and mine, as we turned away from the vats. The end.